Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining today. I'm honored to be speaking from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, Esquimalt and Songhees. Today, we have another snapshot of some of the effects that COVID-19 has had on our province. Statistics Canada released the Labour Force Survey results for the month of June. The monthly survey reflects the employment information from June 14th to June 20th, which is right in the middle of our gradual economic reopening, phase 2 of our restart plan. The data released today for British Columbians paints a picture of cautious optimism with a long road ahead of us. We continue to see positive signs as a result of BC's restart plan. In fact, more than 118,000 people found jobs last month. And when we look over the longer term, employment gains in May and June bring back about 40% of the total job losses we've seen in BC since February. So no question these numbers are encouraging. But as I said, we have a long way to go. While we have one of the most comprehensive plans in the country that supports people and businesses, one example would be our emergency benefit for workers, now surpassed 600,000 British Columbians who receive that benefit, as well as our tax credit increases, business tax cuts, rent supplements, support for income assistance and people on disabilities, tax payment deferrals, and a number of other supports. It's clear that there are still thousands of British Columbians and businesses that are still struggling. The total net job loss since the start of the pandemic stands at 235,000. And again, while that's a large number, those are people. Those are families. Those are individuals and communities. Consistent with what we've seen since the start of the health crisis, the services sector continued to show the greatest overall losses since the beginning of the pandemic. But as businesses reopen and we go through the restart, it's actually where we're also seeing the significant job gains. In fact, the accommodation and food services sector accounts for 50% of this month's gain in jobs. But again, despite the job gains, as more people look to enter the workforce, it does affect our unemployment number. So BC's unemployment number for June stands at 13%, which is down slightly from 13.4% in May. BC's unemployment rate, as I mentioned, remains higher as more people look to enter the workforce. That may reflect an increase in the demand for jobs, as well as an increase in confidence that people will have the opportunity to go back to work as they start looking again. So while job numbers in June reflect a large increase in employment gains, certainly there continue to be challenges. The youth unemployment, for example. That rate stands out in particular, 29.1%, up another 0.2 of a percentage point since May. Again, part of that is a result of young people getting back in, looking for work again. And some good news on that front, 45,000 young people did in fact find jobs last month. A positive sign as well, as I said, that they have confidence that they'll be able to find work and they're entering back into the workforce. So that just does give us an increase, as I said, in the unemployment rate, but it does express growing confidence. So it's a reminder that we need to stay focused. We need to stay focused on our restart plan, doing it in a safe and responsible way so that we can see more and more businesses open. You'll remember me saying last month that I thought it was important to note that restart does not mean full rehire. Businesses are taking it cautiously. They're making sure that their employees are safe. They're making sure their customers will be safe. And people are starting to see that confidence by going back to businesses. That's going to give British Columbia a head start when it comes to our economic recovery. And the most important piece to reiterate again, of course, is the importance of following Dr. Bonnie Henry's advice and Minister Dick's. The best start we can have for our economy, the best recovery for our economy, is making sure that we continue to fight COVID-19. And that's a huge appreciation and thank you to all British Columbians who have done an exceptional job. And I know we'll use that same kind of energy and discipline and care and attention as we get into economic recovery and through the restart. So these are a snapshot, once again, of COVID-19's impact on British Columbians. I will have another snapshot next week, as you know, when I update British Columbians on our province's finances. We'll be looking at the extraordinary investments we've had to make to support people, to support services, and to support businesses, as well as updated revenue and deficit forecasts. And that, of course, will further inform our economic recovery planning. Thanks so much. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Minister. As a reminder to everybody on the phone, please press star 1 to enter the queue. You are limited to one question and one follow-up only. I would also ask that you please unmute your phones. You will not be audible until I call your name. First question this morning is from Yvette Brend, CBC.
Hello, yes, Minister. Economists are telling us that Canada is really not even halfway recovered, and BC is lagging behind a bit at 30% when you factor in the underemployed. I'm wondering how you're going to address the fears of parents that aren't sure if they're going to be able to work if school doesn't return full time, and people who are underemployed, technically employed but not working. This is affecting a lot of lower paid workers. Does BC have a plan?
There is no question that's part of why we've taken a look at our recovery plan, why we're talking to British Columbians, why we're making sure that our recovery plan will be focused on the sectors that have been hardest hit. As you point out, youth, it really is a staggering figure when we take a look at the youth numbers. We're obviously looking at things like support for post-secondary, for training, for skills development, for youth groups and youth employment. Those are things that right now we're looking at as part of our restart and part of our economic recovery. So those are pieces that are critical. I think you heard from Minister Fleming about the school plan ready for September as well. But these are critical questions, and part of the reason that we're making sure that we're engaging British Columbians and engaging people from sectors. The Premier had a youth engagement process this week as well. So we're making sure that we're including those people in the discussions around what the plans will be so we can make sure we're addressing the biggest needs.
Do you have a follow-up, Yvette? Okay, moving on to Carla Wilson, Times Colonist.
Hello. I'm wondering if you are planning anything to do with the hotel sector as far as allowing municipalities to grant them property tax relief.
Well, again, we've granted relief when it comes to property tax for all commercial businesses. In fact, it's a $700 million investment. This isn't simply a deferral. This is actually a cut in property taxes for commercial businesses by about 25%. So from the province's perspective, we put those measures in place. But again, we'll be continuing to look at the economic recovery plan and other areas that we can support. I think it's a good sign, again, that you're seeing that 50% increase in jobs coming from those sectors. You're starting to see, as we've encouraged British Columbians to safely and cautiously travel within the province, I think you see British Columbians listening to that message, providing support to accommodation. I know that the Okanagan is talking about how busy they are this summer. And again, I think that's credit to British Columbians who are doing their part to support our businesses during this difficult time.
Do you have a follow-up, Carla? Okay, next we have Vaughn Palmer, Vancouver Sun.
Good morning, Minister James. During the deepest part of the pandemic, in March and April, we were often told that and saw that British Columbia economy had never been shut down as extensively as some other jurisdictions. The construction sector kept working here, for example. I'm wondering, given that, why the unemployment rate here remains higher than it is, say, in Ontario and Quebec, which had a bigger shutdown. Why has it taken us longer than those provinces to turn things around?
I think part of the answer, Vaughn, of course, are people now entering back into the workforce, which doesn't drop the unemployment number because there are more people now who are looking for work. So I think, in fact, some of that, although it doesn't shift the unemployment number, is in fact a sign of the confidence that people are having in British Columbia. They're entering back in. They're saying that it's possible to get work. So we're going to start looking for work. And so they're included in these numbers. So I think that's part of the explanation. I think the other piece, of course, is the tourism and the service sector is a big sector here in British Columbia. There's no question that it's going to be impacted, not in the short term, but probably in the long term when you look at international visitors, when you look at the challenges that that's going to face for that industry. So I think that's also part of the explanation that you're seeing here in BC.
Do you have a follow-up, Vaughn?
Yes, please. You flagged the what I took as one of the more surprising numbers in the survey, which is that the accommodation and food services sector has really bounced back remarkably. More than 50,000 jobs added there. And I would say, in spite of the fact that there's been no reopening of the province to international travelers, to the U.S., I guess around that, do you have any sense of why they've been able to do so well without the international travel and the cruise ships and the border crossing? And does it suggest that perhaps that sector might fare better than we thought it would in spite of the loss of all those tourists?
Well, I think there is no question, and it's anecdotal, but there is no question that British Columbians are stepping up to the plate. Whether it's my neighbors or the people in my community or the people I talk to around the province, they're looking for their local vacation. They're looking for an opportunity for places that may have been full in the summer previously because you had international visitors coming in, you had hotels that were full with cruise ship passengers. They now have an opportunity to be able to partake in some of those areas that they didn't have a chance to before, because it was busy with international visitors. So I give full credit to British Columbians who are really looking at trying to find. I've talked to a number of people who've said, I couldn't find anything. I was looking for an opportunity in August for a holiday and everything's full. That's a very positive sign from my perspective. So we'll be watching closely. I think it's not unreasonable to recognize that there's still a lot of volatility in the economy. There's a lot of volatility in the recovery process. We'll have to watch it carefully over the fall, but I think it's certainly a positive sign from my perspective, and I give full credit to the people in our province.
Next question is from Richard Zussman, Global News.
You mentioned the number, Minister James, of over 600,000 British Columbians have applied for the $1,000 relief. Does this number surprise you? Does it still work inside the $5 billion that have been earmarked? And is there any thought being given, considering this pandemic is dragging on longer than I think many people anticipated, of having another round of financial relief for people?
So a number of our relief measures for people and for businesses, in fact, continue to be open. And in fact, we've extended them for exactly the reasons that you raise. The Premier and I said when we announced the measures, the COVID action plan, that we wanted to make sure we were responsive and that we were flexible. Because again, no one has a playbook for dealing with this pandemic. We have to make sure we're monitoring as we go along. So as you may know, we've extended the rent supplement, so it's a longer period of time. People still have the opportunity to apply for the emergency benefit for workers, so that is still open for people to apply if they've lost their job and haven't been able to go back to work. We've extended our support for people on income assistance and disabilities for over the summer months to get us through till September. In fact, that's exactly what we've done. We've looked at the need, we've looked at the supports that are needed for people, and we've extended them to be able to give people the opportunity to have that kind of support that is critical during this difficult time. And on the issue of the $5 billion, are we still within the $5 billion? Yes, we are, and we'll have details about that coming up as part of the economic statement next week.
Do you have a follow-up, Richard?
I do, thank you. And on that economic statement next week, is there anything you take out of these job numbers that can help sort of us better understand what we should expect for next week in terms of how hard hit the economy has been throughout this pandemic?
Well, I would say if you look at the numbers, I use cautious optimism, and perhaps that's just the direction of a finance minister, but I think we are going in the right direction. These numbers show we're going in the right direction. They show that we're providing support to people, but people are also returning to the workforce. Jobs are being created. The restart does mean that businesses are reopening. But it's a long-term process. This isn't going to be a short-term process to get us back on track. It's a long-term process, and I think you saw that with the federal announcement around the deficit numbers and around what the federal government was looking at, and you'll see it again reflected in our numbers next week, that this has had a major impact. And although there are good positive signs, there's still lots of people and lots of businesses that are hurting, that are really struggling, and so we need to make sure that our recovery plan addresses those, that we provide short and long-term support, and that we address the impacts that have happened in our province, and that'll be outlined next week.
Next question is from Les Lane, Times Colonist.
Oh, thanks. Minister, how's BC making out convincing Ottawa that BC Ferries should be eligible for the wage subsidy program?
Well, you may know that the Premier doesn't give up. He continues to push hard. We've had some good success, as you know, on the sick leave and raising that issue up to the federal level and getting the federal government to engage around sick pay for people, because we know that's such a critical part of making sure that we continue to fight COVID-19. So we're continuing work on the ferries. You may know that the federal government is putting money aside, $14 billion across the country, for all provinces to take part for economic recovery. We're still in negotiations, so I can't give you details on that piece yet. We're still in negotiations, and the key really for us in BC will be what's included in that $14 billion, our share of that $14 billion. How many pieces does the federal government expect it to cover? And then are there pieces outside that? So as you mentioned, we've been talking about BC Ferries, we've been talking about transit and the importance of transit and making sure we have support for transit, because again, if we're looking at economic recovery, you can't do that unless we put money into transportation and transit. So waiting for those details through negotiations as well.
Do you have a follow-up, Les?
Yeah, the eligibility, the complicated wrangle, but it looks like a long shot. If you fail on that move, is it safe to assume that you would be counting BC's share of that additional payout to provinces? You'll just use some of that for BC Ferries?
I'm not going to second guess what the negotiations will bring and what restrictions will be put or what categories will be put in place from the federal government. Those discussions are going well at this stage, so I'll let those discussions occur.
Next question is from Tyler Orton, Business in Vancouver.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. We see that BC's employment numbers improved in June, but if you look at Metro Vancouver, the unemployment rate actually went up compared with the period before that. What do you attribute that to?
I think there's no question that this is related to the challenges of the service sector industry, the challenges of the tourism industry, the challenges of not having international visitors. You would by now in Vancouver and in Victoria be seeing cruise ships coming in. You would be seeing passengers unload. You would be seeing people through the downtown core, and that's just not possible. As I mentioned earlier, we have to make sure that health and safety comes first. That's our best economic plan. So I think there's no question that's having a big impact on the Metro Vancouver area as well as the Victoria area.
Do you have a follow-up, Tyler?
Yes, please. With regards to economists, they're saying that the pace of job gains may not extend beyond July. Do you have any forecast on when you expect maybe job gains to begin easing at some point?
I wish I had that crystal ball. I wish I had that crystal ball for the economy, for the recovery, for the second wave if it was going to come. I think it's really an unknown at this stage. It's why, as I mentioned, we have to really make sure that we're being flexible, that we're being responsive, that we're following and looking at where the needs are, what sectors are being impacted. The volatility continues to be there, and you see it when you talk to private sector forecasters who all have a different view of where our growth may or may not come, how big the drop is going to be in our growth in revenue. So again, I'll have some details about that next week when I bring the economic statement forward, but I think this continues to be a close watch. This continues to be responsive from government's perspective, continuing to look at where the challenges are, because I don't think anyone has that crystal ball or that prediction that they can look at.
We have time for one more question. We're going to go back to Yvette Brend for CBC.
Thank you. Minister, I still just didn't get an answer to my initial question. I'm wondering if BC has any plan for the people that have been hit inequitably by this. I mean, you're seeing more low-income people that don't have jobs, that have hours cut, more women than men. Is there any plan to sort of help the people that are really hit hard by this?
No question. And in fact, if you look at the recovery plan and the public consultation we're doing on the recovery plan, the Premier and I, as part of that, outlined the fact that the recovery plan will need to take into account the sectors, the individuals, the demographics that have been hit the hardest. One size will not fit all. when it comes to a recovery plan. We need to make sure that we're addressing youth. We need to make sure we're addressing women. We need to make sure we're addressing the service sector industry that has been hard hit. Arts and culture, another area that's been hard hit. So in fact, that's exactly the reason that we're putting together our economic recovery plan. Why we put specific money aside from the $5 billion was to make sure that we gave the time to be able to see where the impacts were, to see where the need was greatest, so that we can focus that as part of our recovery plan. So yes, that's exactly the direction that we're taking, and that will be part of the recovery plan when it comes forward.
That's all the time we have this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.